Good afternoon, everyone. Country Flyboy here, and today, more for the Cessna Caravan. We're going to be talking about abnormal procedures today. So, the first videos through the tutorial series, as always, details normal procedures and stuff like that. Usually, I do other stuff like flight planning, IFR, and stuff, but I think now I want to switch it up. The reason is, for this particular aircraft, and for most airplanes, really, the way you fly it doesn't really change between IFR and VFR. What changes is the procedures you use for navigating, basically. So now I want to look at some stuff that's not normally talked about amongst aircraft tutorials, and that is the abnormal procedures. So we're getting ready to fly today. Let's go ahead and close the baggage door. And let's go ahead and head up front and step into my office. Alrighty. So we're back here in the Caravan. Now today we're in the passenger version of the Caravan, and we're here at Valdosta. Nice clear weather. We're in standard atmosphere again. Sun's starting to go down, so we might get into a little bit of night flying, but I want to talk about abnormal procedures today, starting with the engine clearing procedure and working my way from there. Now, as per some requests from people, I've made my mouse cursor bigger for the tutorials. I do want to apologize. Some people have suggested I move the mouse a little too fast. I really wish there was a way to draw emphasis to what I'm talking about without just circling the mouse around things. To make things a little easier, I have made the mouse cursor bigger, but I'm probably still going to move it fast because I have a very sensitive mouse for gaming purposes, and I tend to move it quickly anyway, so yeah. Anyway, the first thing I want to talk about is the engine clearing procedure. Now, what is the engine clearing procedure? Well, it's a procedure you do that is designed to remove internally trapped fuel vapor, or if there's evidence of a fire within the engine, you would do this as well. Now, what it does is it passes air through the engine, and that purges fuel from the engine, basically. Vapor, or any fire if there is there in the combustion section, gas generator, turbine, power, all that fun stuff. So basically, we're purging the engine. We're clearing it. If we flooded it, this could be used to clear it if there's been a fire recently. And basically, we're just getting, it's like we're clearing the engine, basically. We're going to pass new air through it. So to do this, we first make sure our fuel condition lever is in the cutoff position. I'm going to go ahead and advance that to full forward. Engine switch is in the normal position. Battery switch, we'll go ahead and flip this on. Fuel shutoff valve is open. So right there, it's in the open position. Fuel boost switch is on or off if there is a fire expected. So boost on. Start switch to motor. Now, I'm going to turn the battery off real quick to save power because I don't want to kill it. Again, the Caravan was not modeled 100% correctly. So in the real Caravan, you would flip the switch to motor, which basically turns the starter. It keeps it moving. Now, in Flight Sim, you can't really do that. There's not really a reason to do that. So Carenado in this one just made it a two-position switch. It's either in start or off. Now in the Caravan EX, you can flip it to motor. I think you can also flip it to motor in the default Caravan as well, though it doesn't really do anything. It's really just a dummy position. So unfortunately, we can't really do an engine clearing procedure. Now, I'm still going to go through the procedure, but you don't want, it really doesn't do anything. So when we're clearing, do not exceed the starter cycle limitations, and should the fire persist, if you believe there is one, as indicated by a sustained ITT, close fuel shutoff valve and continuing motoring the engines. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to click this. So basically the thing is we're going to turn the engine without actually adding any fuel to it. And we're just going to keep the engine turning for a little while. We can't exceed 24 seconds though. We're approaching 10 seconds. At 20 seconds, I'm going to turn the starter off. Alright, starter's off, fuel pump's off, and battery's off, just to save that. So, starter switch off, fuel boost switch off, and fuel shutoff valve closed, and battery switch off. Allow the required cooling period for the starter before any further starting operations. Refer to the second video of the series for the starter and engine information. So basically, we just cleared the engine. We've ran new air through the engine. It's clear of any fuel vapor it may have had trapped in it. Alright, so next thing I want to talk about is the cold weather procedures. Special procedures when operating the aircraft in cold weather conditions. So I've set the weather to be cold and snowy, even though it's springtime in South Georgia, but we can do that anyway. So cold weather often causes conditions which require special care prior to flight. One of the things we need to do is we need to operate the elevator and trim tabs, and probably the rudder trim too, through their full range of motion in both directions. And that will ensure a smooth operation by reducing any stiffness in these systems caused by cold weather. And next thing we need to do is take a look at our takeoff conditions, especially for takeoff and land, actually both takeoff and landing, but doubly for takeoff, because if there's snow or slush covering takeoff surfaces, then we need to allow for more distance, as it's going to increasingly extend our takeoff run the more slush and snow there is. Now, Flight Sim X by default does not actually account for slush or snow or contaminated runways, even though it does know whether or not the runway is contaminated, because it will draw, you can actually see it drawing the wet surfaces, but it doesn't really take into account the performance decreases on contaminated surfaces by default, though there are add-ons out there that will allow you to do this. It's still good practice to get into the habit of knowing that you're going to have a longer takeoff run on a contaminated surface. So we definitely want to check that. So I'm going to go ahead and we're going to move the elevator trim up to full nose down. And I'm also going to hold down the button for aileron trim as I do this. Move these through their full range of motion. And we'll move this back to takeoff position right there. And same with the rudder. And now I'll just recenter that and recenter that. Alright. Yeah. Alright, so I've moved trim through their full range of motion and recentered them and set for takeoff, so we've done that. Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is flying into icing conditions. We've talked a little bit about icing before now, but I do want to note that the Caravan is not equipped with de-icing systems. It is equipped with anti-icing systems. Don't let this fool you. It's anti-icing, not de-icing. So that means that we cannot break off any icing that has already formed on the aircraft. We can only prevent icing from forming, and that only works on the protected surfaces. So the following conditions may be conductive of severe in-flight icing. Visible rain at a temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. Droplets that splash or splatter on impact at temperature below 0 degrees Celsius. Now, that really doesn't help us in Flight Sim. So basically, rain below 0 degrees Celsius is bad. And as you can see, it is below 0 degrees Celsius today. Yeah, it's actually snowing. So we are in icing conditions right now. And with all these cloud cover here, we're going to be climbing into icing conditions as well. So we would most likely want to get the plane de-iced prior to actually flying. If you have the Ground Services X add-on, you can get the aircraft de-iced, and it actually does de-ice the plane, because FSX does account for icing on the aircraft. FSX does a lot of things that it accounts for, but doesn't ever do anything with them. Like contaminated runways. It knows if the runway is contaminated or not, but does nothing with it other than draw an overlay. Same with icing. It knows whether or not the plane has occurred icing, and even to a different severity level, but doesn't really do anything with it. Now, GSX will allow you to de-ice the plane, and depending on which fluid you use, it will stay de-iced for X amount of time. I'm going to go ahead and turn on all of our de-icing equipment. Let's prop, turn on the inertial separator as well. We don't need a wing light on, it's daytime. So, now FSX knows icing, but it also knows whether or not your icing equipment is on. So, it really just does a simplistic, do you have icing or not? And if the anti-ice or de-ice equipment is on, you can't accumulate icing. That's just how FSX works. It's not perfect, not realistic, but that's just how it is. So, once the de-icing equipment is on, then we've pretty much cleared all icing. Not 100% realistic, but that's kind of how it works. Now, while the Caravan is certified for flight into known icing conditions, flight time in these conditions should be kept to a minimum. This is especially true of severe icing conditions. It's important to know how to identify severe icing conditions during flight, which we kind of already talked about. Icing conditions that exceed those which the airplane is certified for can be identified as follows. Unusual, extensive ice occurred on the airframe in areas not normally observed. So areas that don't normally get icing on them, if you're starting to see icing form, you're probably in more icing than the plane can handle. Accumulation of ice on lower surfaces of the wing aft of the protected areas. So if I bring this down, here's the protected areas, is where the black stuff on the wing is. That's the boots there. That's where all the protected surfaces are. If you're starting to see ice occur underside of the wing after the protective area, then you're in some bad icing conditions. Now note, most aircraft designed for FSX do not support visual ice accumulation in FSX. In fact, I only know of one airplane that does. But FSX does support icing effects on the aircraft and its handling characteristics, and many add-ons will also increase the effects of this icing. Notably, FS Captain's one that does that. However, since most airplanes do not support visual icing buildup, you need to be especially careful. If it's as it could happen that you stumble into icing conditions and the plane is picking up icing, and you wouldn't know it because you can't actually look and tell in FSX if ice is building up, unless you have the one airplane out there that I know does support that feature. So that's another thing to note. It's advisable just to avoid severe icing conditions at all, both in real life and especially in flight sim, because you can occur icing without realizing it. Alright, so the last thing I want to cover is actually two things. The pre-maneuver checks, which you would do prior to doing any maneuvers in the airplane, such as ground reference, flight training, or stalls and spins and stuff like that. Then I want to talk about the stall and spin behavior of the airplane. So first thing is the pre-maneuver checks. I'm going to turn the aircraft westbound for a little bit. The pre-maneuver checks of the aircraft are very, very similar. In fact, they're the same checklist as the before landing GUMPS check. So the GUMPS check is that check you run before landing to make sure everything's set up. We basically run the same thing for pre-maneuver checks. So there's just one extra step. So GUMPS check is gas, both tanks on, undercarriage or fixed gear, mixture, or in this aircraft condition lever, full forward, props is full forward for max RPM, seatbelts are set, that's a real life thing, not a flight sim thing, and the last one unique to the pre-maneuver checks is C, or clearing turns. Perform your clearing turns, 2 90-degree left turns, or one to the left, one to the right, to clear the area and check for traffic. I'm not really going to bother doing the clearing turns today since we are in Flight Simulator, but we are a bit close to an airport, but I really don't care. There's no traffic around right now. Watch me hit somebody. There's a CRJ up there, but he's no factor. Alright, so the thing I want to focus on right now is stalls and spins. Now, I don't know if Carenado got the physics right in this plane or not. It does not want to stall. I've never flown a real-life Caravan. That might be realistic behavior. I've heard the Caravan is a very stable plane, so maybe it just doesn't like to stall. Or spin. I mean, you cannot spin this plane to save its life. It does not want to spin. I've sort of been able to get it into kind of a spin, but it almost self-recovers from it. It's kind of neat. Now, stalls, on the other hand, pretty much any airplane can do. Now, I want to say something here. The stall and spin behavior and characteristics of the aircraft are conventional, meaning you pretty much what you learned in flight school. That's what this plane's gonna do. That's kind of how it works. So you'll get as you approach the stall, control surfaces become sluggish. Notably, the ailerons, they won't be as effective. You'll also get some buffeting on the plane. The stall indicator on this aircraft is electronic, and it's a constant beeping sound. You'll hear it when we do the stalls in a little bit. So I'm going to perform 2 stalls, a stall clean and a stall dirty. So real quick, I'm going to fly the aircraft towards that small lake right there. It's going to be my reference point. And that's the autopilot getting cut off. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is the stall clean. So I'm going to throttle back to just above that flight idle point where the throttle just likes to, the plane just likes to drop out of the sky when you bring it past that point. Maintaining altitude, let the plane slow down. And this is going to be the departure stall. So we slow the plane down to about takeoff speed, which is 90 knots. We're coming up on that now. Then we pitch up and go full throttle and just keep pitching the plane back until it stalls. And that's the departure stall. And it's a recovery procedure that we want to practice. Alright, we're going to go full throttle now. Now I also want to make, this plane does not really like to do departure stalls either, because it's actually a pretty powerful engine in this thing. So we're bringing this airplane up, 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 waiting on that stall. There's the buffeting. It's getting really squirrely. There's the brake. Nose over, speed up, right back into the climb. That's our departure stall. It's just like flying the 172, basically. It's the exact same characteristics. Notably, the plane does get very squirrely. I think that might be a physics thing. Like, the ailerons don't get... Here, I'll put it in slow flight real quick. Let's go to the first notch of flaps. Second notch of flaps. Full flaps. And I'm going to put it in slow flight. Watch this. We're down. Get it down to the bottom of the green arc. Now, in slow flight, the way it should work is your flight controls should be sluggish. And they are. See, I'm giving it... Let me turn on the yoke here. Watch this. I'm giving it full deflection left and right, and it's not wanting to turn at all. It's barely wanting to turn. It's a noticeably slower roll rate in a slow flight configuration. And now that I got my flaps at full, I'm going to bring the throttle out. Flare for landing, flare for... This is the dirty stall. Flare for landing, flare for landing. Stall brakes, full throttle, nose down. First notch of flaps out. Get back into that positive rate of climb is what we're looking for. Altitude increasing, second notch of flaps in. I want the airplane to accelerate above 90 knots. Climbing 90 knots, flaps up. So that was the recovery procedure from slow flight dirty, or from stall dirty right there, which is basically the same as the go-around procedure in this aircraft. So that's the two things I wanted to note before we close out the video. The stall and spin characteristics of this aircraft are conventional, pretty much the same as you would expect from most airplanes. And the recovery procedure is pretty much standard. There's nothing special about the recovery procedure. Just a couple of notes. It seems that when you are doing stall clean, the plane wants to get really squirrely when the speed drops, and I don't know why. It's only when doing stall clean, because when I did slow flight, you saw it. It wasn't that bad. I don't really know what's up there. It's weird. And the plane doesn't want to stall at all to save its life. It barely ever stalls or spins. I keep mixing those two terms up. I'm sorry. But basically, yes, the stall characteristics are conventional to this aircraft and most other planes. And the plane doesn't want to spin. If you do somehow manage to get it into a spin, then the recovery procedure is standard, which is neutral elevator, neutral ailerons, rudder in the opposite direction of the spin. If you can't tell the direction of the spin, look at your turn coordinator right here. It will tell you the direction of spin. The ball will be spinning in the, I think, opposite the direction of the spin is where the ball goes. But yeah, rudder to stop the spin. Once the spinning has stopped, rudder out, and then back pressure on the yoke, pull out of the dive. Make sure you pull out of the dive slowly. You're going to be in an unusual attitude at the time, and you probably are going to be picking up speed quickly, so you don't want to yank the stick back and rip your wings off. Alright, that does it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and we will see you next time. Take care, everybody.